For half a century, American textbooks told a very clean story about the first humans to reach the Americas. It sounded logical, it sounded scientific, and for decades it was treated as settled fact. The Clovis people were the first Americans, the pioneers. The moment human history began in the New World, then a child buried beneath Montana soil changed everything. Not a warrior, not a king, an infant. Barely 18 months old when they died more than 12,000 years ago. Wrapped in hides, covered in red ochre, buried with more than 100 carefully crafted stone tools. For decades, that burial was simply considered one of the most important Clovis archaeological sites ever discovered. But when scientists finally sequenced the child's DNA, the results forced archaeologists to rethink one of the most famous theories in American prehistory. Because the Clovis people were not the first Americans. They were only one chapter in a story that began thousands of years earlier. And the evidence wasn't just hidden in stone tools or ancient campsites. It was written inside the genome of a child whose descendants are still alive today. If you enjoy deep history, ancestry mysteries, and discoveries that reshape how we understand the past, make sure you're subscribed now. This channel explores the evidence behind the stories we think we know. And the real story of the first Americans is far more complex than the one most of us learned in school. To understand how this happened, we need to go back to the moment the Clovis theory first appeared. The year was 1932. In eastern New Mexico, near a place called Blackwater Draw, archaeologists were excavating layers of ancient sediment during the middle of the Dust Bowl. What they discovered looked like something out of another world. Large fluted spear points made from carefully shaped stone, sharp, elegant, and unmistakably crafted by skilled human hands. But what made the discovery extraordinary was where those spear points were found. They were lying next to the bones of extinct Ice Age animals, mammoths, ancient bison, megafauna that had vanished from North America more than 10,000 years earlier. That meant these tools had to be incredibly old. Within a few years, archaeologists began finding similar spear points all across North America, from New Mexico to Colorado, from Arizona to the Great Plains, from Canada to Mexico. Wherever they looked, the same distinctive tool technology appeared. Those spear points became known as Clovis points, and the culture associated with them became known as the Clovis people. The dates seem to line up perfectly with another major event in Earth's history, the end of the last ice age. Around 20,000 years ago, massive ice sheets covered much of North America. The Laurentide ice sheet blanketed eastern Canada. The Cordilleran ice sheet covered the western mountains. Between them, the continent was almost completely sealed off from the north. But around 13 to 14,000 years ago, something changed. The climate began to warm. Glaciers started melting, and a narrow passage opened between the ice sheets, an ice-free corridor. At the same time, the land bridge known as Bering connected Siberia and Alaska. This led archaeologists to propose a simple and elegant theory. Ancient hunter-gatherers from Asia crossed the Bering Land Bridge into Alaska. Then, when the ice corridor opened, they traveled south into the heart of North America. Within a short period of time, they spread across the entire continent. Wherever they went, they carried the same distinctive Clovis spear point technology. The Clovis people were the first Americans. The theory was clean. It was logical. And for decades, it appeared to fit the available evidence perfectly. Universities taught it. Textbooks printed it. Students memorized it. Clovis First. For nearly 50 years, questioning that idea was extremely difficult, because the Clovis culture was not just an archaeological discovery. It had become a scientific framework, and frameworks are hard to change once entire careers, research programs, and institutions are built around them. But far to the south, something unexpected was waiting. In the late 1970s, archaeologist Tom Dillehay began excavating a site in southern Chile called Monte Verde. Monte Verde sits more than 8,000 miles south of Alaska. If Clovis people were the first Americans arriving through an ice corridor in North America, sites in South America should appear much later. But what Dillehay found at Monte Verde did not match that expectation. The site contained preserved wooden structures, stone tools, Animal remains, plant fibers, evidence of human activity that was unmistakable. When the site was dated, the results stunned the archaeological community. Monteverde appeared to be more than 14,500 years old. That was at least 1,000 years older than the earliest Clovis sites. At first, many archaeologists rejected the results. Some argued the dating must be wrong. Others suggested contamination. For years, the discovery remained controversial. But as more evidence accumulated, Monteverde eventually gained broad acceptance. And once that happened, other discoveries started appearing. In Oregon's Paisley Caves, archaeologists found fossilized human coprolites, ancient preserved feces, containing DNA that dated to around 14,500 years ago. In Idaho, the Cooper's Ferry site produced stone tools dating back roughly 16,000 years. Then came one of the most astonishing discoveries of all. At White Sands in New Mexico, researchers uncovered a series of fossilized human footprints, adults and children walking across soft ground that later hardened into stone. Using radiocarbon dating on plant seeds embedded in the layers of sediment, researchers estimated some of those footprints could be between 21 and 23,000 years old. That would place humans in North America during the height of the last ice age, thousands of years before the supposed ice-free corridor existed. Suddenly, the Clovis First model was no longer sufficient. Something more complicated was happening, and that is where the child in Montana enters the story. In 1968, construction workers digging near Wilsall, Montana, uncovered human bones. Surrounding the remains were more than 100 Clovis stone artifacts, fluted spear points, blades, tools crafted with remarkable precision. The burial also contained red ochre, a powdered iron oxide used in many ancient burial rituals. The bones belonged to a very young child, about 18 months old at death. The site became known as Anzick. For decades, the remains were stored and studied as an important Clovis burial. But in 2014, geneticists sequenced the entire genome from the child's remains, 3 billion base pairs of DNA. One of the first complete genomes ever recovered from an ancient American burial. The results were published in the journal Nature, and they answered several major questions at once. First, the child's DNA clearly showed ancestry connected to populations that originated in Siberia and Beringia. This confirmed that the earliest Americans ultimately came from Asia. Second, the genome showed a close genetic relationship between the Clovis child and modern indigenous populations throughout the Americas. In other words, the Clovis people were not a mysterious lost population. They were direct ancestors of many Native American groups alive today. But the third discovery was the most important. When scientists compared the genome to modern indigenous populations, they noticed something unexpected. Not everyone shared the same genetic lineage. Most Native American populations showed strong genetic links to the Anzick child, but others showed ancestry from slightly different branches. This indicated that the populations who entered the Americas had already begun splitting into different groups before the Clovis culture appeared. Those splits may have happened as early as 17 to 20,000 years ago. That means the ancestors of Native Americans were likely already living in or near Beringia long before the Clovis culture developed. Instead of a single migration wave, the genetic evidence suggests multiple movements of people over thousands of years. Some groups may have traveled along the Pacific coastline using boats or coastal travel routes. Others may have moved inland later, as glaciers retreated. This is known as the coastal migration theory. Sea levels during the Ice Age were much lower than they are today. Large stretches of coastline that ancient travelers might have used are now submerged beneath the Pacific Ocean. That makes archaeological evidence difficult to find, but the genetic evidence remains. DNA does not disappear when coastlines flood, and DNA tells a clear story. The peopling of the Americas was not a single moment. It was a long process involving multiple populations moving across landscapes over thousands of years. By the time the Clovis culture emerged around 13,000 years ago, humans had likely already been living in the Americas for millennia. Clovis technology spread rapidly because it was effective. The distinctive spear points were excellent hunting tools, but the people who used them were not the first humans on the continent. They were descendants of earlier migrants, and the child buried in Montana helped scientists prove it. There is another part of the Anzick story that is just as important as the science. After the genome was published, researchers worked with Native American communities connected to the region. The genetic evidence confirmed that modern indigenous populations are directly related to ancient peoples who lived in the Americas thousands of years ago. Under U.S. law, specifically the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act, ancestral remains linked to living communities must be returned. In 2014, the Anzick child was reburied with ceremony, not as an archaeological specimen, but as an ancestor. Today, many genetic studies involving ancient remains are conducted in partnership with indigenous communities, because genetics can reveal ancestry, but cultural identity belongs to the people who carry those traditions forward. What the Anzick genome ultimately showed was not just a new scientific model. It revealed continuity, an unbroken human story stretching from Ice Age migrants to millions of indigenous people living in the Americas today. The first Americans were not a single group arriving at a single moment. They were many groups traveling across vast landscapes during one of the most challenging climates in human history. Some likely moved along Pacific coastlines. Others spread through interior river systems. Over thousands of years, they adapted to deserts, forests, mountains, and plains. They developed cultures, technologies, languages, communities. By the time Clovis technology appeared, the Americas were already home, and the descendants of those earliest travelers are still here. That is the deeper lesson hidden inside the DNA of a child buried more than 12,000 years ago. Science did not destroy the Clovis theory. It refined it. It replaced a simple story with a richer one. The Clovis culture remains one of the earliest widespread archaeological traditions in North America, but it is no longer considered the beginning. Instead, it represents a moment in a much longer human journey, a chapter in a story stretching back at least 20,000 years, maybe more. And the more scientists study ancient DNA, the more that story continues to grow. If you found this fascinating, hit the like button so more people can discover this history. Subscribe if you enjoy deep dives into ancestry, genetics, and the real stories behind human origins. And tell me in the comments, when you were in school, were you taught the Clovis First theory? Or did you learn the newer discoveries about the first Americans? Because history isn't static. Every new discovery adds another piece to the puzzle. And sometimes the most powerful evidence comes from the quietest voices in the past, like the DNA preserved in the bones of a child who lived and died more than 12,000 years ago. The Clovis people were not the first Americans, but thanks to one ancient genome, we now understand that the story of the first Americans is far older, far deeper, and far more extraordinary than anyone once imagined, and we are only just beginning to uncover it.